Here we go. Welcome to the live broadcast of Best for the World. Today I'm joined by the crew of the SustainMe podcast.
Hello.
And hello, guys.
Hello.
Can you give us like a short introduction in what you do, what the SustainMe podcast is basically about?
Yeah, sure. So Chimo and me, we're both students at Malmo University, alongside another colleague, Natalie, and we are studying leadership for sustainability. And essentially, we decided to have a podcast where we try to just have some conversations about topics that we found interested and view them through a lens of sustainability, while giving people kind of practical tools on how to live a more sustainable life. So we bring guests from different companies, like, for example, Orkla, ESS, different individuals that have their own startups, to essentially discuss how they kind of got started with the notion of sustainability and share their personal journey with working with it.
Yeah.
Anything else, Chino?
That's pretty much it. Yeah, well summed up.
How many episodes have you done so far?
I think so far we've done around 16. We still haven't released two. We have 2 more episodes to release, but we kind of put the podcast on hold while this Corona thing kind of subsides a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, we have 2 seasons. The first season was 8 episodes, and the second season is supposed to be 10 episodes, and then we planned on going season by season, but unfortunately circumstances it's kind of stopped it. So we're seeing how we can incorporate the next ones we have, and then what we can do for the next season as well. So we'll see.
Yeah, and that is basically directly leading us to the topic for today, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
we wanted to want to explore actually a little bit the current situation with the coronavirus through the lens of sustainability. And who to better have this dialogue with than the experts on sustainability?
I would like to say that I don't think nobody's really an expert on sustainability.
Yeah.
I think we're just system thinkers that try to understand the holistic view of what's happening, but it's very complex. So we'll try to do our best.
So how do we dive into this? Paulo, you have an idea on where to start, since you already mentioned it's a very complex topic in itself.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think when you talk about sustainability, the first thing that comes into mind is the triple bottom line. So sustainability is about looking at the economy, the social, and the environment aspects of our lives. So I guess when we start thinking about the coronavirus, it has effects on all 3 aspects. If you look at right now, with the way that the whole world has kind of stopped, it has an effect on the environment because, well, we're not emitting as much carbon dioxide as before. So it has a positive effect towards the environment. Then you have the economic side where, well, that's not having a very good positive effect right now. And it's also as well with the social side because, well, we're isolated, right? And like Chimo and I were discussing earlier, it's a little bit difficult right now.
Yeah. So also the thing is that normally it also affects us, like with our podcast. So normally we have a studio where we record our podcast, and then we all get in there. We have like this chats with each other, and we have this personal interconnection, and like you get to, like hug each other and like, just talk about people, how you feel and all that. And that's a way for us to kind of just reconnect, because that's our bonding sessions whenever we have these podcast sessions, and then we proceed to talk about what we're going to talk about. But now obviously with the whole situation, we're a bit dispersed out, and we don't quite feel like it's the same. So coming out of this, obviously this situation is going to change the way we do things going forward. We have to maybe look at alternatives on how we normally would do things in the past, and it's a huge learning curve, and it affects every aspect of our lives, and as it relates to sustainability as well, as Paulo already mentioned. So, but I think the social part, yeah, we as individuals and humans, obviously we're the people that are, when you talk about the economy, it's like humans going to work and, you know, doing certain jobs to, you know, pay taxes and all that. Obviously that's going to change because people are now working from home. What if you cannot work from home, type of thing? What if your job doesn't allow it? So there's a lot of things that will need to be taken into consideration when we come out of this. And as we were chatting with Paulo, hopefully it's positive, but we'll wait and see, because we also have like a amnesia memory as humans. So
yeah, I think go ahead, Jens.
Yeah, I was just thinking of like, I mean, first of all, it's complex, as you said. So everybody has a different interpretation or like a personal experience. So for some people, for me, for example, it doesn't really affect me much because I have been working, at least on a social level, been working from home mostly anyway. So, you know, for me, this situation doesn't really change something. But obviously, for people who have to be at a certain place at a certain time, that is a whole different situation.
Yes.
But what I was wanting to refer to is this learning curve that you mentioned, is like people have been, I think, coming up with so many creative solutions in the past, I don't know, weeks and months, of how can we still interact on a social level, how can we still meet, how can we sessions like this, have virtual meetings, to come together despite the situation that is happening.
Yes, I think that's really beautiful. Like I had a group of people that were playing volleyball, and since we can't train anymore, they decided to do some online games and have a Zoom talk like this, and then still meet. But I think what I found interesting about this situation in particular is that it kind of goes to highlight how kind of rigid our infrastructures are nowadays. We're very dependent upon these type of ways of communicating or working, that if something like a virus like this happens, it all breaks down. So I think it's important to kind of take this time to reflect upon how we should move forward from here on. How we should, what type of economy do we want to have in the future? What type of interactions are we going to have? Because we're very connected nowadays. But I think that no matter, at least for me, I realize that no matter if we can have a conversation by Zoom or Skype, I still missed kind of that human touch. So it's kind of making me revalue the way that I want to interact with one another. And it's very powerful. So I think it's a very good time for us to reflect what we want to have out of our world, like now with the infrastructures that we have, instead of just being super scared. Because I think it's like you mentioned as well, here in Sweden, I feel like Sweden is kind of a spectator of the coronavirus. If I talk to my mom, she's in Mexico, and she's like, in lockdown, freaking out. If I talk to my cousin, he's in Spain, he hasn't left home in like 3 weeks. And here in Sweden, it's like I go out and there is a notion that something is different, but not quite. So it's quite weird,
Yeah, I have the same feeling. I mean, on last week on Sunday in Germany, they basically allowed that you can only go out in people in groups of 2. And at the same time in Sweden, the minister, the president, what is it? The minister said, Prime Minister, exactly. Yeah. Thanks. Held a speech and basically said, well, we are not going to do any drastic measurements. And I feel like since then people have interpreted this in a way of, well, then it can't be that bad. And since then I have seen more people in the streets, in the restaurants, and then having this German perspective in my back of my head, I'm going on the streets and it is really feeling a little bit weird.
Yeah.
It's quite strange, I must say. Also, I mean, I grew up in South Africa, and they've gone into a lockdown for now for the next 21 days. And you must one has to take into perspective that going on lockdown in certain countries are very different. There's like, you go to countries where you can afford to go on lockdown, where maybe 3 people share the apartment or the house, and that's cool. But when you have like overcrowded, like housing, like infrastructure, where maybe 10 people live in a specific, like little tiny household, how do you say go on lockdown? If one person gets affected, everyone gets infected. So it's a social problem that society, we have to look at ways, reevaluate the way we do things, and also the damage we're causing on the environment and the nature, because the virus didn't just spring out of nowhere. There's been a lot of virologists and what this new field of study called planetary health. They've been investigating like what the damage to the ecosystems is causing us humans, because a lot of these viruses now, the pathogens now jump from animals to humans, and we're having a lot more of these cases. But we still think that, okay, it's just nature, like, but we are contributing to the effect, and pandemics will happen, but we are now seeing the acceleration of them happening. There was Ebola, then there was SARS, then there was like, now there's this. So we also, hopefully when we come out of this, we really think about what we're doing as in a holistic point of view. This is where we try to come in as sustainability learners or researchers. How can we view the system from not just from a tiny lens or a hollow lens, but from a holistic and systemic point of view. And hopefully, my hope is that when we come out of this, that we really, our perspectives on life and how we should do things change for the long term. Otherwise, it doesn't help.
I agree with you. I think another thing, going back to your point, Jens, when you talked a little bit about the, kind of the different levels of information. Like in Germany, there's all this lockdown, and you don't necessarily know, how to feel about it. The family that I live with here in Malmo, the wife that lives here, she works for Malmo Stad in the communication department, and she was telling me that apparently people from Somalia didn't think that they could be affected by the virus because they didn't trust the authorities. So essentially they had a communication problem of how to translate to them, and they had to take care. And in Stockholm, I think they had 30 deaths the other day, and 15 of them were from Somalian people. So it's interesting as well how it kind of gives you a perspective on the different ways that people gain information and how we spread information as well. Because one of the things that I'm more afraid about the coronavirus is kind of the long-term mental effects that it will have on people, and kind of like all this information. Sometimes it's too much information. You have sources telling you that it's coming from this side, there are sources telling you that it's coming from here. Like the numbers are kind of very wide. There's mistrust. So this kind of goes to highlight that we need to have a system where this information becomes more transparent, where governments need to come up and say, hey, you know what? We don't necessarily know what's going to happen, but help people understand that so that we are able to take care of it in a better way. It's a crazy situation.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is exactly what is giving me hope also, despite all this kind of chaos and maybe all the confusion that is going on is, and this is also one of the reasons why we are hosting this live broadcast, because we think, especially now, you mentioned this already, Paulo, it's a good time to reflect, to pause, to take a minute to think about what is actually happening. How do we affect our planet? How do we affect the systems? What kind of systems do we have in place? I mean, it is, on the one hand, it is just a virus, right? It is, I mean, it's a situation that we have to take serious, no question about it. But it's also, in some way, we will get out of this. I mean, but at the same time, just this kind of virus makes all the economic systems already crash. And I read that I think 1/4 or 1/3 of the stock market has lost the value already, just by so there you see again how fragile our systems are actually. And yeah, that's, I think, what I see also from so many people right now is so many ideas popping up, so many people pointing out, well, these are, the specific patterns that are not working. Here are an example of how we have created this situation. And that makes me in one way hopeful, but in the other hand, I'm also wondering if the situation passes, if the virus passes, and how much of these information, how much of these ideas will we really implement, or do we somehow go back to normal?
Well, to be honest, I feel like us humans, sometimes we know what we must do, but we still choose to do differently because we're habitual creatures, right? And I think with this whole situation, you could look at it different levels, and that's kind of what sustainability is about, right? And I think it's important to understand that the Earth is a living system itself, and this is very powerful because that means that if we are not in relationship or in harmony with Earth, then the Earth will create these viruses in order to heal itself, right? So if we choose to ignore this, and this kind of goes back to what Chuma was saying of these viruses kind of keep popping up, it could be that these viruses are keep popping up because nature is kind of viewing us as humans as not necessarily as an organism, but a virus itself. So this might be the vaccine for Earth. And we have to understand that. We have to kind of sit down and say, okay, where are we? Like, what does it actually mean to be human? You can't view humans as this kind of a hierarchical, on top predators in the food chain, because that's not the way that it actually is. But we have to understand what is our relationship. I think that's something more kind of towards the spiritual aspect, but I think it's something that is very needed for us nowadays. We become too materialistic driven, and material wealth, it's very good, and it's it allows us to create medicine and have these infrastructures. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't make us happy, if it doesn't allow us to live in harmony, then it's all done for the wrong reasons. And that's what we need to reflect upon. What are we creating all of these things that we're doing for? What is the outcome?
Yeah, I think also just to add to that, one of the hopes is like it's like when we come out of this, the way we measure in terms of the way we measure the growth and success of a country or a specific context changes. There's now models like saying we should now start looking at human happiness index, like instead of GDP, gross gross domestic product. And that is something that in the long term we want to know how many of your population are truly happy. I mean, if you look at Sweden, where it's 52%, around 52% of the households, the single households, like there's a lot of like high level of depression and people are living alone. It's very individualistic. Yeah, they have a great GDP, they have an economic, it's one of the richest countries in the world. But in terms of happiness, how many people are truly, can you say, are like truly happy? So maybe that's one thing that after all of this, we say we all went through it together as a whole, as humanity, like it affected each and every part of us. Now, let's reset, come back, and start putting things that actually matter to us and forget about the materialistic things, like you said, Paul. I mean, there will still always be there in terms of urbanization and technology improvement. It has made life easier for us. But at the same time, we have to think about the consequences of overdoing it, like just continuously plowing through the resources of the earth. We really need to reconsider. And that's really what I'm hopeful of, that after this, the way we measure certain elements of like success in our different contexts, like changes for the better.
Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking a lot about, is this kind of like notion of capital, right? Yeah. You have monetary capital, but you also have social capital.
Yeah.
So I think, I come from the technology background. So I always try to see things of how the technological advancements is shaping humanity as well. And in the next 10 to 15 years, a lot of the jobs that, are not being run right now because of the coronavirus are going to be automated. So that means a lot of people are going to be out of jobs. So our economic system is not built at this moment to kind of have that infrastructure of automation anymore. But that's because we value just money. That's because we're only valuing the GDP and stuff like that. But what if we start shifting our values and we start to say, okay, what if a company's stock is not only reliant upon how much they produce, but how their employees feel? What kind of feedback they're providing to the social values. This kind of goes into social innovation and social entrepreneurship. But I think that's the future, because we will have abundance. It's not like we don't have, we can produce stuff. We can, but if we're not happy, if we're not safe, if we don't have a system that is supportive of everyone so that they can go below a certain threshold, then it's not going to work. Because small businesses right now with this coronavirus, they're going to crumble.
Yeah.
What happens when the small businesses crumble? The economy crumbles. So you have to make sure that you build an infrastructure to support them so that they can never truly fall, so that they give something back.
A lot needs to change. That's
yes.
A lot needs to change.
Yeah, it really sounds like, and I mean that's I guess very obvious and coming out of all the discussions we are having here as well, and also what you guys are mentioning is that we really need change on a systemic level, that we really need to rethink and rebuild the way we run organizations, the way we run societies, the way we run governments. What do we measure? What do we pay attention to? What do we focus on? What is really important, and how can we build from that a structure that is supportive for what we truly value, and what is, I always say, giving us meaning or giving us life. But this basically means things like you said, how happy are we actually as a nation? How happy are we as individual people? How healthy are we as individual people?
Yeah,
I think it's interesting because I've been reading this book on system thinking, and in a system you always have kind of delays. You have inputs, you have outputs, but the interesting part is when you look at sustainability, for example, and you look at the 2030 agenda, and you look at the limits of growth, and all of these kind of like the planetary boundaries and the things that we need to do to ensure that we don't have a huge climate change or a climate crisis and all of this different stuff. I think right now what we're seeing is that since we stopped our infrastructure, nature can kind of heal herself pretty well. But that's kind of goes back to our need for humans to kind of control stuff, right? What if, just an idea, instead of running factories 24/7, you do for 4 days? You have a 4-day week where you work for 4 days, you produce for 4 days, and then you let nature breathe for a little bit. And you have to do things differently. Yeah. But it kind of, I think it's scary because, well, we're kind of like we're a machine, and we've been running for such a long time, and now something has stopped the machine a little bit. It's like, but we still want to keep running because that's what we're used to. But we realize that it's not how fast you run, but it's how you run. It's you have to look at it in the long term, and that's not something that we've been good at. But hopefully now with this situation, we can understand that producing and making new innovations every single year and creating something new is not sustainable.
Yeah. Obviously, as the going says, necessity is the mother of all inventions. So what's going to happen is that from this crisis we have, it's inevitable that there will be new inventions that will come up after this, and there will be ways, you know, we're gonna kind of future-proof ourselves from this sort of things in the future of occurring again. But we never really truly can get it right 100%. My only hope and wish is that when we do these inventions, that we think about it from a holistic point of view. We don't just think about the financial part, because a lot of the time in sustainability, it's all about, okay, financial sustainability. We're going to create this firm because we're going to gain money. We're going to gain some like economic capital. And once we do that, is the firm running for 20 years? Yes. How much damage have we done to society? We don't really care so much. How much are your employees happy? Well, they come to work every day, they get paid. So I guess that's happiness. No, hopefully we think about it like, you know, how are they connected to nature? Do you do things in your organization or your firm that makes people like reflect on the impact that they have within society? Those kind of things is what I hope we get out of this, because we will create things. We will, I mean, there's already so many inventions going on. People at home, you start tapping into your creative brain and like, oh, what about this? And now you have so much time, you know? So, so what happens with those kind of inventions? That's what I want to, hopefully we do it for good and not just to make economic gain and financial gain. That's my wish.
Yeah, I can only agree. And I really like what you say about this being a test run, and this is why I refer to the situation right now and the virus as something that will go over. And but as you said, it will be only a small wave, maybe before other waves are coming. And I'm especially pointing towards you know, climate change being on the horizon, and we can already see the impact and the effect on the planet. And I think that is something which might be eventually be the doom for humanity if we don't take this chance that we now have and reflect really on how can we redesign our whole society from a holistic perspective, as you say. But instead of, you know, pointing a kind of pessimistic picture, I want to ask you guys, have you seen some of the examples or where organizations, governments have really tackled the issue of sustainability from a holistic perspective? Do you have some like success stories?
I guess we interviewed, we had a conversation with Mark Anthony, which is the project director from ESS, which is the European Spallation Station, or Spallation
source.
Spallation source. And what they're trying to do there is build the largest neutrino research facility in the world. And this was a 3 billion mega project. And what was interesting about them is that they took sustainability as a core value. So meaning that the facility is being constructed with long-term thinking, so that the vehicles, for example, are they don't emit as much CO2 as, they're quite new. They're also built an electronic infrastructure and all this stuff. I think that's a positive step forward, because that kind of you know, it's a big project that can create that can bring a lot of good for humanity in terms of research that you can do with neutrino. But they still have this notion of this is extremely important, and they're kind of leading the way. So I'm hoping that future projects, mega projects, or, you know, infrastructures that we build can take into consideration or inspiration what they have done, because it's not longer about, you know, constructing a factory, but it's about thinking, how am I constructing the factory? What am I doing with the waste from the factory? How am I ensuring that this is going to be sustainable in the long term? And this is from a big project, this is the first time I've seen something. From government, I personally haven't seen that very much. But I think that's a little bit more of a complex issue, because there are many stakeholders involved and different power dynamics. But hopefully we will start seeing that in the future. But I think that won't happen until our generation will start electing people that kind of have this mentality, that want to not only, you know, tell us, hey, this is a solution, but explain to us, that really help us understand the holistic way of going and make sure that they're doing something right.
Yeah. I mean, when you with regards to your question, Jens, are you referring to this within this time frame of the coronavirus period, or in general? Because
I was asking in general. If you have a specific example right now, I mean,
yeah,
it's also fine.
No, that's. I mean, like Paulo said, it's there are organizations doing things from a holistic point of view, like making sure that the environmental aspect, social aspect, and obviously the financial aspect is always there if you want to have a firm that stands the test of time. But right now, within the coronavirus period, I think most of the things being done are from a financial and a social perspective, and nature is just kind of like doing its own thing, because it's like, okay, you guys can't go outside, now I can breathe again. So I think we're solving the environmental part by just staying indoors and isolating. Not so much cars and emissions going on at the moment, but when it comes to the social and financial parts, there's been like organizations that those that can afford it, that obviously have ensured that their employees will get their full pay even when they stay at home if they're sick, and put extra contractual aspects into their documentation that ensures that they can contact psychologists, or if they're feeling distressed, and for free, and people to talk to, because people feel lonely in this period of time. I mean, you go to work, even though it seems like right now it's obsolete going to work because you can work from home, but still we crave that human interaction. Like, we crave that human how are you doing, the hug, the touch, you get a good feeling from it. So the organizations doing that, and different governments are trying to make sure that in a lot of countries, actually, I must say, a lot of people are one medical bill away from going into bankruptcy and extreme poverty. So some governments are trying to make sure that doesn't happen by offering the services, the coronavirus services, in a manner that doesn't bankrupt people, by saying, we'll test you for free, just don't infect other people, because people are scared to go to hospitals. Like, how am I going to pay this? How am I going to afford this? And so those are things that are being done. It's not exactly holistic, but I think nature and environment is taking care. It's teaching us the way to go. Yeah,
I think another thing that kind of came into my mind was there's this company called Gravity Payments in the US, and there's a CEO called Dan Price, and essentially he was making, I don't know, like 3 million or something every year, or he was making an absurd amount, just like a top CEO would make. And what he decided to do was to take a paycheck cut and make sure that all his employees got a minimum salary of $70,000 a year, which was kind of the minimum required salary for them to live in. I don't remember what state it was.
Seattle, I think.
Seattle, yes, which was for them to live in Seattle. And this was very good, because this is a person that took into consideration the health of his employees and said, okay, I, as a leader of a company, will allow them to. I want my employees to get a minimum, baseline. But what was interesting is that this kind of had then effects that you wouldn't expect, because now the employees had the minimum salary of 70,000. It's a big corporation which hires a lot of people, so naturally those people moved into better houses, which made the prices of the housing increase.
Yeah.
And what the CEO was saying is, I believe that I need to be taxed more because I'm having negative effects, but I can't carry everyone. So it's important to understand that although an organization might be able to do something, it will have negative effects if it's not being matched by the same amount of help or willingness to do something from the government.
What I find interesting, especially in these times of as you mentioned, when we just stop producing, how fast planet Earth can recover, how fast we can see regenerative patterns, functioning.
Yeah.
And so maybe the question shouldn't be like, what can we do, but maybe more like, what should we definitely stop doing?
Absolutely.
What are our limits? What's the limits of humans? Where can we operate so that nature can still do her thing without us getting in the way?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing. That's definitely why we have to look at it from a holistic point of view and a systemic point of view, because if you talk about the different aspects of sustainability, we all know the economic part, that's like covered, but when you start venturing into the balance between the environmental and the social part, you want people to improve their quality of life. How do you do that? Is it more urbanization? But that means you're gonna maybe do a lot more deforestation, but for them to move into cleaner houses or maybe have cleaner water, there has to be this resource like extraction that needs to be happen for them to have this built. So it's a lot of things that we have to take into consideration, and we need leaders, like young leaders like us, to start thinking outside the box. Yeah, and it's a very cliche thing to say, but really we have to start thinking from a holistic point of view how we can help the situation. Yeah, so I guess that's why we're here.
I think but going back to kind of the environment thing, there was this documentary on Netflix called Our Planet, and what I found interesting is that they gave many examples of species that were under threat of extinction from specific areas, and the governments decided, okay, we're going to protect this area, nobody goes in there, and within 4 years they came back to life just like that. So it's super interesting how we as humans kind of always try to do something. We're very good at trying to control an outcome, but we're not very good at understanding that sometimes we can't control an outcome and we have to let go. So I think this comes, I think, very in part with spirituality. I think what humans need now nowadays is not necessarily an economic kind of growth or social growth. We need to be more in contact with our humanity. We need to be more in contact with our needs, our true needs, not the outside needs,
not our
but
wants.
the needs. No. What we truly value, and the thing, we push those things away. And there's this really interesting story about a sultan that was about to die, and he had 4 wives, and he essentially goes to his 4th wife and says, I am about to die. I have given you everything, all my material needs, and I've always cared for you the most, and I always loved you the most. Would you accompany me in this time? And she says, no, there's someone else. I'm going now. Okay, bye-bye. He goes to the 3rd wife. Same thing. I have spent a lot of time with you to make you look beautiful. Would you please help me go with me when I die? No, I will not. Okay. Then goes to the 2nd wife. Would you please go with me? I know I haven't talked to you very much. He says, I will do my best to set up the funeral and everything, but I cannot accompany you. So then he goes to his 1st wife. Then he's devastated, and the 1st wife says, I will accompany you. I will be there for you. And the Sultan feels devastated. He goes, oh, you were always there for me. You always took care for me in the moments where I didn't feel worth it. And I never cherished you. I never tried to grow you. Thank you so much. The 4th wife represents our material aspects, the ones that we kind of put a lot of effort to cultivate. The 3rd wife is the physical aspect, our bodies, the things that we try to make ourselves feel beautiful. The 2nd wife is the friends and family. And the 1st wife represents our soul. Our soul being that inner part of us that always goes with us, but we sometimes tend to neglect because we try to cherish these other aspects that are not as important. So this is a very powerful, I think, story, because it allows us to understand that sometimes the things that we neglect the most are the ones that we actually need the most. But we become kind of blinded to the lures of the other wives or the other aspects. So
Yeah, I like that you also bring it to the spiritual aspect, because I think we have lost touch in these times, especially in the materialistic, environment that we're living in, with the soul level, with
Mm.
like things that truly matter to us. And if you think about it, why do we call the planet Earth also Mother Earth? Why, when we think of Gaia, it is always the
Hmm.
woman, and
Yeah.
we have in some way really raped this female aspect,
Hmm.
in a metaphorical way, but also in a exploitative exploitative way of extracting resources from the planet. So I think that's something we we need to be in touch with again. And I wanted to ask you, do you have found any like tools or ways of how this can be done? I mean, on a personal level, but I'm also thinking, since you have talked to a lot of people and have just studied this topic, have you come across any tools that are helpful for, taking a step into the direction of holistic solutions?
Well, so we in our podcast we try to promote the like personal aspects also of sustainability, because it's a journey and not all of us start in this exact same place, and it's never, we don't really have a set destination. It's continuous improvements of our lives for the better, from a holistic point of view. So and we have these things on our post. We have this well-being Wednesdays, or like Sunday facts, like little things. So like do what it is that gives you inner joy. Like if you play the guitar, pick up your guitar, play the guitar, and sing a song to yourself, smile to yourself, this type of things. If you enjoy reading a book, reconnect with reading a book. It's unfortunate that we are in lockdown now, but take a walk in nature. You feel so good. Like when we recover from this, go towards nature and appreciate the magnitude and like the vastness and the beauty of what nature can bring to you. So those little things is like things like that. I like to do sports, play some sports, just to keep my mind clear and going. So I mean, sustainability it's such a big and vast complex topic, but we have these three pillars, but we can also do certain things within our lives to enhance ourselves. Like, if you have a lot of clothes, you don't need more clothes. You can give away clothes. You have this good feeling when you give away something. Even though you don't notice it, like it's like, oh, I gave something away. You feel good about doing something nice. Just little things like that. For me, at least, that's how. Yeah, that's what keeps me ticking.
Yeah. I think it's very personal. Because it also depends on kind of your faith, right? And how you kind of gain a sense of inner joy and happiness. But you know, I think something for myself at least is reading from people that have gone through great adversity gives me hope, and people that have done something good. Right now, I'm reading a book called Beyond Religion by the Dalai Lama, for example. Uh, so it's just little things, or calling someone and saying, I miss you. Like really understanding, being honest with myself on who are the people that are important in my life, and connecting to them, because I think that that's something that is very personal. And I think we all kind of know what things makes us happy, but sometimes we neglect to do them because we get lost in other things that are not so important, right? Uh, we have addictive behaviors, addictive patterns. And for myself, I can say that my phone is one of the things that I'm trying to get away from, because it's not. I realize that I'm not using it in a healthy way. So it's how do I take this time now that I'm essentially alone, and there's kind of like this lurch of just going to my phone to do something differently, to maybe meditate, to do a little bit of yoga, to go for a walk in nature, to get away from the things that I believe are important, and reconnecting to the things that I know are important. And I think that's the most difficult part, to understand that we have to accept actually and have compassion that maybe we've been focusing on things that are not in line with who we are. And I think it's a process. I think we all do it in a different way. But if I could give advice to people, is to just try to be more honest with yourself and to look for those things that make you happy. You know, if it's going for a walk, if it's meditating, if it's reading a book, even if it's just laying down and doing absolutely nothing. Like,
it's also okay. Yeah.
Well, this was an answer I really didn't expect, because for me, sustainability was always like this big topic, right? This big complex topic of like, how can I do something? But I mean, all the examples that you gave were very, very much in reach for me as an individual person. I mean, I can just decide now to go out for a walk, 15 minutes, half an hour, you know, sit in the sun for a minute, read a book, all these things, whatever gives you joy. So you make it very personal, and this feels for me like very empowering. Like I can do so much about it, and I don't really have to, you know, focus on maybe how can I change the system completely. You know,
Yeah.
I don't need to have all these answers. I need to start in a place where I feel like I can contribute the most, what gives me the most meaning.
yes,
I really
that
love this.
that's something that we discuss a lot in our podcast, is kind of taking this inside out approach, right? Before, because you know, I think here in the West, we have this mentality, and I personally have been kind of a victim, not a victim of it, but I've taken it too seriously of this kind of work and success. It's outside success, you know, like you have to work, you have to be productive, you have to do this and that and that and that and that. When you do that very much, then you burn out. So that's not sustainable, because then if you're burned out or you're stressed out, you're thinking about stupid stuff, you're not working well, you're not having good conversations with your family. So okay, take a step back, sustain yourself, allow yourself to have that level of happiness, and you're going to be a better human being from that point, because you're being genuine. You're going to accept others a little bit better. You're going to understand that we're humans. We have our darkness, we have the things that makes us us, but we can have compassion. And from that compassion, then we can start building something new, something that takes into consideration these aspects and not neglects them. You know, sometimes we don't want to look at the ugly, but we should look at the ugly, but we should look at it with a different lens, with understanding. So I think inside out is good for sustainability.
Small steps. So small
Yes.
steps.
I think that's a good, also leading us to, you know, wrapping this discussion up. Is there anything that you feel like that you definitely need to express, or want to address when we speak about sustainability? Something that we haven't touched upon.
It's a process.
Yeah.
I,
It's a continuously learning process, and I know it can be overwhelming. As I said earlier, we all start in different like levels. When you meet someone who's been working with sustainability for 20 years, they still don't have all the knowledge. There's something about your knowledge that you can bring to the table, something new that they might not have thought about. So it's like we can learn from each other. It's all about partnerships, small steps, collaborations. We can't do it alone. No one single person can do it alone. And we're always willing to learn from each other and take it step by step. We cannot change the entire system of the world, but if we can change how we interact with our neighbor, how we interact with the people in our organization, how we interact with, like, you know, if they change their attitude
with ourselves,
with ourselves, you know, those little things, before you know it, that's a huge impact you made within your society, your environment. And if that spreads, then that's a step we're taking towards making a better society. So
yeah,
you gotta take it easy. Do these little things first, and then like try to build partnerships and learn from each other. That's what I'd say from my point of view.
yeah. I going back to that point. I think synergies are extremely important. We have to understand that our collective power is far more powerful than what any individual can do. But in order for us to have synergies, we have to be open. We have to be willing to learn from each other. So I think it's of extremely importance that we kind of become more open. We become radically open-minded upon our limits, upon the things where we're not doing good, and push towards outside of our comfort zone, and be okay with that. Be okay with failing, be okay with making a mistake, be okay with being vulnerable. I think it's of crucial importance if we want to build a sustainable society, to be human. We are human. We're going to fall. We don't know everything. We have to accept that. So yeah, I would say that's about it.
I mean, I really much enjoyed this discussion, this dialogue. Thank you so much, guys. How can people listen to your podcast, SustainMe? What are the platforms?
So we are on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast. If you go on Spotify and you just search SustainMe, you should be able to find us. You can also find our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/SustainMePodcast.
And Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram as well. You can also search for SustainMe Podcast. So we are in all that social media, but yeah, and if you want to just send us a private through Facebook, or as well as send us an email at sustainme.ask@gmail.com.
Awesome. So thank you very much for this great dialogue and for taking small steps into the direction that is best for the world.
Yes.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, gents.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.